Welcome to the Archetypal Mosaic, Davide De Angelis.
Thank you. Great to be here.
This is our second interview, and your incredible Starman Tarot deck, Remastered, is on its way coming out September 28th, 2025. Congratulations on the new variant.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really excited about this remastered deck, I have to say.
We're going to talk all about it, all about your collaborations with Bowie on the cover arts of the several albums, your incredible business and artistic technique of your tarot, the merch that you have coinciding with the tarot deck. I actually have the deluxe box of the original. So we'll talk about a lot of these incredible artistic elements. First of all, I'm going to read about the upcoming Starman Tarot Remastered Tarot Deck and Guidebook box set. Artist Davide De Angelis actively collaborated with David Bowie for more than 7 years, working together on the visual elements for the Outside and Earthling albums, as well as design on art shows, books, and more. The Starman Tarot is inspired by De Angelis and Bowie's creative interactions, a techno-shamanic deck charged with elements of sacred geometry, world mystery traditions, and sacred futurism. In the spirit of David Bowie's lifelong metamorphosis, this fully remastered second edition, Starman, is the next evolution of the original. Starman Tarot Remastered features a new card back design and updated and redesigned card images, as well as adjusted card sizing to capture peripheral artwork not visible in the original. Let's talk about that. Can you tell us about the new changes, the new additions, and this incredible peripheral artwork, along with the additional anecdotes with working with Bowie?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Well, I mean, really what they mean is that the original cards, if you have the deck, I think you do, they were quite tall and slim. And over the years, it was originally released in 2018. And, I mean, thousands and thousands of people have given me feedback now. And one of the feedbacks that I got from people using the deck was that they had problems shuffling them because there's a lot of women use tarot, amazing women tarot readers and experimenters. And they were saying, it might be okay I've got really long, finely tuned hands, so I can grip these cards, but they said that they're just a little bit too long for some of us when we're trying to shuffle them. So I took that feedback on, and then I realized that if we could actually it was all to do with the team that I'm working with at Red Feather now, who are absolutely amazing. They've done incredible work on this remastered deck, so I just want to give them a shout out. And we realized that on the original artwork, there was quite a bit at the sides of each card, which literally sort of got trimmed off. So with this new size, it's a wider but less tall. We were able to sort of bring in some of those things that got trimmed off. I mean, it's nothing, to be perfectly frank, it's nothing startling, but it just adds more of the atmosphere of the cards, I feel. It just brings more of them to life. Yeah, so that's really the thing about, just adding that little extra bit to each side of the cards, which I'm really happy about now. And obviously the back of the cards was another thing. You know what? I have to confess that we used this kind of alien typography, which was kind of it was when Bowie and I were communicating with each other, we would send things back and forth by, at the time, it was FTP transfer. If anyone's old enough to remember that, like old modem transfers where you transfer images, and it would literally take hours for even just a JPEG to transfer. And if Bowie was in New York and I was in London, for example, I'd often leave things running overnight to send him images. And I'd write notes and just kind of scan those in and send the notes along with it. And then he'd send me a note back. And somehow along the way, our two notes got scrambled together, and it created this kind of incredible sort of weird hieroglyphics that I've used throughout the deck. That happened quite often. So by some weird osmosis, some other language or some hidden symbolic forms came out of the actual process of the notes being scrambled together. So that was part of the original design, but I actually always felt a little bit disappointed with the back of the cards. I felt that they didn't communicate really fully what I feel that they could have done. So this was an opportunity to kind of put that right and include some of that sort of alien typography, as it's been labeled, and to bring a bigger idea of the sacred geometries to life that are woven throughout the deck, and this kind of idea of the sort of holographic principle as well, which is kind of taken on from that, that idea of the holographic universe, etc., etc. Yeah, so those things were fundamental. And then there was also, very clearly I felt I needed to create some new images for some of the cards. I mean, to tell it how it is, I've actually worked on every single card. So all 78 cards have had kind of like an upgrade or an additional work done to them. So, I mean, I can talk more about that, but maybe you've got a different question.
Sure, I have a lot. First of all, let's focus on, because there's so many things to discuss, but first let's talk about your interactions with Bowie and that incredible menagerie between the two of you that kind of came about and became the sacred third, the transcendent function, as Jung would call it. Tell me, when you wrote to Bowie, just to clarify, was it himself that wrote you back? It wasn't his assistant or Iman or anybody, it was him, correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole way it happened was just to put people in the picture, is that, I was running, I mean, I guess you could call it kind of an avant-garde experimental design studio in London. And, we were kind of on that edge, just where computer art was. I mean, there really wasn't any computer art. I mean, in a sense, we were pioneers in that whole field. There was really very few people using computers to create art and use as art and all of those kind of things. And as a result, we did stir up a lot of interest. And we were featured in different magazines, saying, oh, this is the way we feel digital art could go in the future. And of course, now we're in the future, we know exactly how digital art is unfolded. But at the time, in a way, we were visualizing many of the things that have come to pass, in more recent years. And now, even so, some of the things that are now unfolding through AI and all the different methods that artists are using with AI as well. We were kind of envisaging, I can't even say it. We were visualizing it back in the day. This was in the early 90s, 91, 92. So we were featured in magazines, and one particular magazine was read by Bowie on a flight to New York. I guess he was very in touch with things that were going on, and he would always get sent, things like magazines. They were called Creative Review, and in those days, Creative Technology, Design Week, Art Forum, and all of these kind of things. And we were featured in the one that he read was called Design and Technology. So it was like featuring people using very new ways to innovate design work through technology. And, this was also the days before, it was, although the digital era had the internet had been switched on and it was in its very early stages. And so at the bottom of the article, rather than have a website, which we didn't have, or all of that stuff, we literally had the phone number of my studio. And Bowie literally rang me up. And, I spoke to him, it was that direct. And so, when we would, once we started working together, we would communicate either he would ring me up, he would either visit my studio. I would, if I was because he lived in New York, if I was in New York, I would go and visit. We would sit together. Sometimes we met in like this kind of weird little cafe that he used to go to and have coffee and stuff like that, kind of almost incognito. So, the communication was it. He never sort of gave me communications through a PA or anything like that. It was always direct.
Tell me about him for a moment. When you spent time with him in the cafe, and what kind of aura did he have? What kind of essence did you feel from him?
Well, I felt the first time that I met him, he actually came to my studio in Islington in London, North London. And, you can imagine that somehow word got round that David Bowie was coming to visit me in my studio. I'm not even sure how the word got. I mean, it's obvious, probably, people that work with me chatted about it. And then when he turned up in a blue Mercedes with a driver outside our studio, and then he got out and he came into the studio, and there was like a crowd of people outside, all kind of trying to peer in through the window. But he was just someone who I felt he was very, very relaxed, very natural, and immediately put people at ease when they were in his company. And the thing that really struck me about him was he had a real voracious curiosity, almost like a childlike wonder, curiosity. And that was, very, very palpable through, literally through his presence, and the enthusiasm with which he explored creativity and art and ideas. And it just came across, not in a precocious way or anything like that. He was very humble and very, in some ways, quite shy. And
was there a word or a sentence or an image that he gifted you that stays with you more prominent than anything else?
Well, there's a particular thing that I kind of dined out on it since he came. He did say that my work was potent visual alchemy, and that for me sort of sums up what it, the quintessence of what it was that we were literally looking to create. And for him to say that and to feel that that's where we arrived at, that's always been something really special for me.
That's gorgeous. Now, the two cover arts that you worked with him on, Outside and Earthling, they very much stand out. They're very apropos for their time, and they're kind of endless in their beauty. Can you tell me about how many variants or versions of both of those album covers there were, and how did he choose? For example, I believe that Earthling, he's standing in this beautiful frock and you see his back. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how did he choose, for example, the frock in the back as opposed to the front? And Outside has my favorite of his tracks called "From the Lost Highway." From the Lost Highway, I'm deranged.
I'm deranged. Yeah.
That's my favorite track of his. Tell me about the process of how many variants of both cover arts there were, and how did he and you choose which one would be the final option?
Yeah, well, the thing was that, let's start with the Outside, which was the first one. It was kind of like, it wasn't about the cover, really, which was interesting, because, if you look at that album, I mean, the original one, we did a special edition of it. It's like a whole book with all these different artworks, with all these different characters and personas. So it was really like, it was almost like creating a tarot deck. You know, there was just a whole series of images. There was a story, there was a narrative. So the question was, how are we going to bring this to life? How are we going to, you know, he termed it, you know, a non-linear narrative. How are we going to actually visualize this and all these characters that he'd created? How are we going to do that? And, you know, so because of the way that I was working with images at the time, for me, I always kind of just started off with almost like an intuitive way of working with things. And, you know, if you were like a corporate client, that would create, you know, some form of anxiety, I would imagine, you know, because you know, people always want to see what, you know, what's it going to be like? How's it going to turn out? You know, people want to know, they want to quantify things. But the great thing about working with Bowie is that I said to him, I have no idea how we're going to do this, but we're just going to do it and we'll just see how it unfolds. So in essence, there was just a very rough set of key principles to kick off. One was that, you know, which was almost unheard of at the time. Like Bowie's lyrics were always kind of sacrosanct and, you know, the hallowed thing within an album. And I said to him, well, how about you just can't read the lyrics? That we create visuals of what the visual feel of the lyrics. And he said, great, let's do that. So that was one thing. And then with the characters, each character was morphed from him, from, you know, an original image of him. So we literally created these characters. And, you know, now it doesn't seem like anything because you can go onto anything. You can go onto Midjourney, you can go onto all these different, you can just create yourself as a character. But back then it was something quite different. And, you know, each character had its own personality, its own persona, its own resonance. So a long way of answering your question, there were many different forms that we experimented with. And what tended to happen was that through these interactions, sending things back and forth and just talking and discussing and experimenting with different forms, something coagulated into an idea. So it was very much process driven. It was almost a kind of random in its approach to actually creating a result. So we allowed the randomness of like I was saying at the beginning, like even the way that the modem in those days scrambled those images together and it created something that was actually more beautiful than the original. So we allowed each one of those things, those so-called accidents or randomizations, to help us shape the final thing. And, you know, Earthling was slightly different, which I can talk about if you want me to.
Please talk about that. And one more thing about the random images. Are those images featured in the new remastered tarot deck? Are they visible, at least a few of them, in their original state?
Well, what's included in there is, like I said, these randomized typographies. So, I mean, most of those didn't find their way into the original outside artwork, but I always kept them as and I've used them as kind of references to create different types of typographic forms. And it's just interesting because I personally know what they said, but they've taken on they've transcended the original thing and become something else. So I've included a lot more of those. I've kind of encrypted them, almost like it is kind of like a sacred encryption of these different things that we were thinking about at the time. So different philosophies, different ways of looking at things. You know, we were talking about, you know, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and, things like idealism, and just looking at how, ideas form within culture, different memes, how they influence us. And so there was so many things woven into those communications. And I just feel there's kind of like a rich body of knowledge in there that
it's almost like the DNA of all the work. And I wanted to mention that I think if you have the prints, or if you will have the prints of the DNA elements, the sacred third, that would be in a book just with those, like in the future, and maybe some prints. Oh my God. I think people will go crazy for that museum exhibition and stuff. That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. And what's really interesting, it's almost like, the human genome,
Yeah.
the genome of that original collaboration. And yeah, just some of the typographic things that sort of came out of those kind of randomizations in and of themselves. Some of them look like sort of like incredible, like almost like a sort of proto Cantonese or something like that. It's just these strange languages that I don't know.
DNA, yes.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Earthling. What was the choice with the frock? Was it a real frock or was it a digital frock in terms of the colors? And also, why the back instead of the front? Just a couple of questions like that.
Yeah, that was quite funny because the coat, or the frock coat, was put together by Alexander McQueen, the fashion designer. But there's a bigger story to it, because I remember having, like, Bowie came to my studio and we sat down and we were talking about, just some ideas and how to put this together. And at the time, I became really fascinated with his eyes. And I said, no one's ever put just really done close-ups of your eyes. And so I actually had, I was a bit of an obsessive about, like, these, taking like really macro images of nature and different things. And, if you look at the Earthling artwork, you can see some really interesting sort of kind of patterns that are woven into, if you look at the booklet, the artwork. And I noticed, obviously, Bowie had these two different eyes, and I thought that, the patterns in his eyes were really fascinating. So I took loads and loads of images of up close of his eyes, and which he later got someone else to take some macro images as well, but they weren't as good as mine. And so I still had these, and I thought, well, I'm going to use these elements. But so that was one thing. And then originally I thought, why not have, because the idea was that on all of his albums, he was always on the cover. So that was an interesting thing, because, obviously the whole marketing department of the record companies, they want a picture of David Bowie. Of course they do, because that's how they sell records. They're very direct in that way. A little uncreative, I felt, in overall, unimaginative. The world of marketing doesn't always take art into account, does it? So, or rarely does, actually.
The image of Bowie is also unconsciously attractive to a plethora of people. So the face and the eyes, they want to sell the attractiveness, the multitude.
Absolutely.
Of that. And was it your choice to do the back?
Well, this is the story. So the original idea that I had was to just put his eye on the cover. Mm-hmm. So it's him, mm-hmm. and it's instantly recognizable, or his eyes are instant. Everyone knows he's got these different eyes, like a bit like the alien eyes. He's got the one sort of microdot cocaine eye, and then he's got the bigger one. So these different eyes in slightly different colors. I forget what the actual technical term for that is. There is a. In fact, one of the women who works in the local shop to me has David Bowie eyes, but she has them naturally.
He had like a tennis ball thrown in his eyes when he was younger, right?
He got punched in the eye by someone at school. It was a fight over a girl, believe it or not. So, funnily enough. But anyway, so the original idea was to have the eye, just the iris on the cover. and it's still David Bowie and all of that. And the record company, literally did a backflip when that was put towards them. So then we sort of sifted through quite a lot of ideas, and I just by chance I said to him, how about you're not facing the camera? And there was a couple of people in the meeting who were from and you could see their faces like.
That's going to drop our sales. That's going to drop our sales. Right. Okay.
It wasn't as bad as the faces that they pulled when they saw the outside artwork, I can guarantee, but it was pretty bad. But Bowie just went, like, he loved that idea. And
I like that idea too. You did a great job, by the way. That cover stands out so well. It's a very kingly cover, very imperial, in a beautiful, like, humble way. And it's very colorful. The book deluxe version just pops out still.
I know. Well, believe it or not, that they actually lost the original artwork. So they had to talking about remastering, they had to get me to send them super high resolution images of all the original stuff. But I didn't have it actually dialed up as an artwork because I'd sent it all to them. So they lost that. So, they did a good job on that, fortunately. But anyway, so then we were sort of batting ideas around, and I was just saying, with this idea of, like, earthling, but also this idea of the fact that David Bowie was British, English, and sort of the idea of playing on this sort of the imperialism and the symbolic nature of that, and the green and pleasant land of England and all of this sort of stuff. And I felt that those were very strong icons. And, it was there that this sort of idea sort of formulated about actually having him dressed. So originally he was going to have the Union Jack just wrapped around him. And then I think through conversations with Alexander McQueen, that's where the Union Jack coat, so it's actually a designed coat for him, came up. And then having him there on that background, the field, the British field, with the Union Jack, but with his back to the camera, was, all of those things suddenly came together, and it was like, yep, that's a really strong image. Right. And believe it or not, they've actually turned that's a stamp, like those people used to send letters. So they've actually got a stamp or a set of stamps with that image on it.
Do you get royalties from the post office?
No, I wish I did. If I got royalties from the post office, I would be a rich man. Because
we both deserve to be rich men. God bless us.
I'm rich in many ways, but not from the post office.
Okay, let me ask you just a few more questions about Bowie, and then we're going to get to your cards, of course, to your tarot deck. Did you photograph him, or did you do the design and all of the art design? Who was the photographer of that shoot?
I think it was, God, I should know his name. Was it Mike Oakenfields or something like that? And I don't remember. It's so long ago now. But yeah, he went in the studio and he got himself photographed for that, wearing the coat with his back to the camera. I mean, there was nothing super special about those photographs in the sense they were just to use as he wasn't photographed. I mapped him onto the field, and did that. And like with the outside stuff, the sort of the reference images were photographed by John Scarisbrick, who's a New York-based photographer, or was. I'm not sure if he's still there now. And, John's a fantastic person. I absolutely love his work. But I think he was like kind of super pissed that we completely, totally and utterly transformed those photographs into something else. So I think when he saw them, he was a bit like, well, hang on, what have you done?
Well,
I've my images.
And they became striking. Let me, so two more things, then we're going to move to the cards. But one thing is, I wanted to ask you, what did Bowie order at the cafe? What was his favorite drink there? And the second thing is, what I'm most impressed by with him, aside from his true artistry, just like you and I, is the fact that when he was passing, he had all those record company meetings to make sure Iman and his daughter and his family were taken care of by releasing a multitude of projects after his passing, and how much care he put into the generational wealth element. So I wanted to ask you those two questions about his human nature, his care for the ones he loved, and how much he cared, and how well he planned, and also what did he order at the cafe?
Well, God, let me think about it. It's an interesting question. I mean, I know he always had like absolutely kind of strong coffee that you could stand your spoon up in.
Turkish coffee.
Yeah, it was kind of like really strong coffee. I mean, you know what coffee's like in New York. They like their coffee there, and they like it proper coffee. I don't really drink it, so it's not my drink. I used to joke with him. Do you want some coffee with your sugars? So he used to. He had. I can't remember. I think it's about 4 or 5 spoons of quite a lot of sugar in his coffee.
Literally, the spoon literally stood up.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I don't think I couldn't even take a sip of that. It was like really strong. So he would always have coffee with sugar, and what did he order? Some kind of sandwich or something. I can't remember what he would eat. So when I did his foods, I was. I mean, I still am. I'm kind of like dedicated vegan. So back in those days, I was like the lunatic fringe. So it was always kind of, and he was brilliant because he wasn't vegan or vegetarian for that matter. So, if we had photo shoots and whatnot, he would always make sure that it was the catering had vegan food so I could have something to eat. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember. Maybe just like a cheese sandwich or something. Can't quite remember. But I mean, most of the time, he just seemed to have coffee. I didn't have him down as a big eater, particularly when he was out and about. He mainly was just have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something like that.
And what about the care element, the care, the generational wealth, the meetings to plan for Iman and the family, just the amount of human care he had for the ones he loved. Did you feel that? Did you see that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was absolutely not privy to any of that information at all, upon his passing or prior to him passing. In fact, by the time he passed away, I hadn't been in contact with him for a good many years, really. So, I wasn't even aware that he was. In fact, I don't think even some people quite close to him in terms of his managerial companies and stuff like that were even aware that he was unwell. So he obviously kept that very well under wraps. And yeah, I mean, I think having had such a, kind of what's the word, interesting life up until he met Imam, and tumultuous on some levels, at times, I think he came into a point where his life really started to take on a different resonance, and there was this just sense that he was really settling into being in a relationship, and obviously they had a daughter together. I mean, he already had a son from his previous relationship with Angie Bowie. But by the time they had their daughter, his son was already quite grown up, quite old. Not old, but maybe I can't remember, maybe in his 20s or something like that. So yeah, I think he really found a contentment, I would say, and a sense of real connection and belonging within that. So I think that was always reflected in decisions he made from that time onwards, I would say.
That's beautiful. Now, to segue into the cards all the way, I just want to say that around the time of the Outside project, when he worked with you, is I believe when he started doing his art prints, the David Bowie, he had a website for David Bowie prints. I remember, I think I've got one back then.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what was your collaboration or influence with his art and prints that he specifically had separate from his music?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And we he introduced me to his art agent at the time, which was a really lovely lady called Kate Shatavian, and she was representing him as a fine artist. And you know, I got along really well with her, and she took some of my stuff on board as well. But what was interesting is that Bowie and I were always putting stuff together. Like, he just this thing of him sending me something and then I'm doing something with it. And then out of that, we would create another. So several of those things that we created together were sold through Kate Shatavian to different collectors around the world. And, so there was that aspect of it. There was also the aspect of, he sometimes he would call me and say, like, I want to do this, but how do you do it? So if he was using computers or stuff like that. In terms of his paintings and things like that, I mean, he was already, quite established in producing art and all kinds of different things, way before. I mean, I was probably still in diapers when he first started doing that, So, he didn't need anything from me to kind of confirm the fact that he was an established artist in his own right. Where I came into the picture was really kind of, I suppose, in adding the technology side to the art. So, that was what we worked on together. And then, I was also very interested in philosophy. I was interested in mysticism and all of those kind of things. I was interested in, consciousness, the definitions of consciousness, certain, ontological questions, philosophical questions, and kind of the ramifications of the culture that we lived in terms of how they would play out in the world in the future. So we shared a lot of, I was also interested in shamanism and energy and all of those kind of things. And I think, we connected on a level that was more than just me doing some art and design for him. There was a dialogue, there was a sense of exploration in our conversations, which was really good.
That's beautiful. That's exceptional. Let's switch to the Starman Tarot Remastered deck. I just want to say that on Amazon, where I just had my first #1 book called Russian Soul Worker for the past 3 days.
Well done. Congratulations. Welcome to the #1s.
Thank you. Your incredible body of work is available on Amazon worldwide through Amazon.com, Amazon UK, Amazon Japan, every Amazon there is all around the world, audience. You can get both the new Starman Tarot Remastered Tarot Deck and Guidebook box set. The release date is September 28th of 2025. And also, you have such a brilliant body of work, which I definitely want everybody in the world to hear, which includes merchandise, tarot bags, art for homes and offices, virtual tarot readings. Now, I just want to say that I've seen many tarot decks and similar decks of cards, and some are basic, some are simple, some are even clunky, but yours are vibrant, living, breathing, multi-dimensional, and as Bowie himself said, alchemical images. So let's talk about first of all, we already talked a little bit about the new deck as opposed to the original. But let's talk more about the new deck and all of the other things that you offer in tandem, which are beautifully, beautifully packaged.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really, really sweet of you to say that. And yeah, I mean, it's just been an amazing journey. I mean, like you said, this tarot deck has gone all over the world, and it's kind of found an audience in incredible amount of countries and different cultures and stuff like that. And I'm really absolutely grateful and delighted by that experience of having that connection with all these different people. And for me, the core message or the vision behind the deck is I feel what gives it a vitas in the world. And it really is that idea that Dostoevsky said it beautifully in one of his books. He said, beauty will save the world. And I really feel that, we find ourselves in a world now that seems to, it has a very fractious relationship with art and creativity and the creative spirit. And the idea of visionaries, the visionary that comes to us and offers us a different, more radical, more open, more beautiful possibility. And there's a very good writer called Charles Eisenstein, and he talks about, I think he describes it as a more beautiful world or possibility that we can create. And I believe it is through the spirit, the creative spirit. The creative spirit can reconfigure how we understand reality, how we understand life. All of the great advances, all the great innovations come from that creative spirit. And it's a little bit like, another writer, I can't remember his name now, but his book's called Recapture the Rapture. And I like that title, struck me, and that I feel that's what it is. And that's what the Starman Tarot, in its essence, although it's using tarot, what I wanted to do is to kind of redefine what tarot is in terms of the archetypes that it connects us to and what those archetypes have to say to us as we're journeying through these very difficult and challenging times, and the possibility of living through a visionary framework, a visionary viewpoint, a visionary context in which this is a bit like in the deck I talk about kintsugi, the art of filling gold and platinum into the cracks of broken things. And the tarot deck, the Starman Tarot, is really about how can we turn this ugliness and this disharmony, how can we reconfigure it so we create out of that energy something, we could create something new and beautiful and different and radical, revolutionary, that detaches us from this old world view, this, as I think that was his name, Yanis Varoufakis. He's a financier, and he calls it like, what's it called now? It's something like, I've forgotten what it is now. It's digital feudalism or something like that. So this idea that we are trapped in this particular holding pattern, which keeps us all limited and keeps us all, framed within this very narrow spectrum of reductionist way of understanding reality. And the Starman Tarot is a declaration of our own miraculous nature. It's also a declaration of what sits beneath everything, the miraculous nature of life that sits there in full view, but hidden by the scope of limiting beliefs that we've been fed over the years. So like Bowie's proclamation, I feel, which was kind of like Starman, the song Starman, I feel is kind of like heralding a new, like Aquarian view of life. That it's kind of the first signal of it. And the Starman is really part of that movement into an Aquarian way of understanding our world and our place in the universe, so to speak. So it's I know it's a long answer to the question, but hopefully it sort of...
It's your philosophy behind the tarot deck. So it's lovely to hear. And, Starman is a lovely thing, but, it takes a certain natural born talent to be a Starman, just like him and you. Tell me, and of course, capitalism is based on the theory of reduction in a way. Let me ask you about your incredible merchandise. And is there going to be a box set similar to Starman, the original? Because for the audience, do some diving into the previous deck. There were several variations. One of them, which I have, it's a beautiful box. It looks like a futuristic future box, and in a way, it is. Is there going to be a deluxe box with this one?
Well, let me tell you, the box for this one, it kind of weaves. It's a beautiful creation. It really is. We've taken it to another level. It's really, I describe the packaging on this remastered deck. It's like literally journeying into the mind of the Starman, or the consciousness of the Starman. So we've really used colors, textures. There's beautiful golds. There's embossings. There's all of the symbologies that are part of the Starman Tarot. But we've really just taken that to, I believe, another level in the way this is presented. So I think, if you go onto my website, you can see kind of a visual of it, but when you actually are holding it and seeing it and using it, just the weight of the cards, the quality of the print, the quality of the way the box unfolds now and opens up into all these layers of imagery. For me, that is really kind of about, like I said, journeying further into that consciousness of the Starman. So I don't think you're going to be disappointed with this new packaging. I think you're going to find something amazing with it.
I'm going to pre-order it right now.
I've sold it to you.
Yes. And to everyone listening, I hope. Tell me a few more things about your incredible opportunities that you offer as well. For example, you offer virtual tarot readings with a deck. You offer art for houses and offices. Can you share with the audience about these incredible opportunities that you offer?
Yeah, I love reading the tarot, and I think that pretty much everyone that I've worked with using the Starman has kind of had, to kind of coin the phrase, has had their mind blown by how working with this deck has a real visceral, energetic quality. And, I would like to say that in some ways, I can't take credit for that. It sounds weird, doesn't it? So it's almost like that deck sort of sought me out to put it together, to bring it to life within this world. And, when I work with people, I really allow the energy of the deck to come through. And it's not like divination. It's like it's seeking to bring people into the divination. So it opens them to the possibilities in their lives and the real potential that they carry as a human being. So that's that's the focus of those readings. It's not for me to say, oh, well, you should have shopped, don't shop at Walmart, go to Harrods or wherever instead. There's not that. It's like opening them up to something fundamental, that there is a capacity, a possibility, a potentializer within them. So that's one thing. And I also do like other one-to-one work with people that I call vital flame coaching, which is really getting clear about what is the most compelling vision for someone and how they can bring that to life. And I also work with another thing that I call money shaman, which is to actually look at how specifically creative entrepreneurs, creative-led entrepreneurs can really flourish in this world, because I feel that it's fundamental. And often the non-linear mind of the creative is not naturally augmented to work with these linear systems. So I like to help people really get clear about how they can bring their ideas to life, how they can flourish in a world that often fights against the creative spirit. So that's another area of things that I'm working on, and I'm just about to kind of relaunch another whole platform on that level.
So that fits me just to the T. I mean, I'm one of those nonlinear super creatives who. What would you give me as a piece of advice for abundance and wealth with a nonlinear creative, ability?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give to someone who's like a creative, like a true creative, but they may be, kind of struggling to find their way, like we were saying, in these kind of linear systems, is to firstly kind of understand the dynamic that is working against you. So it's kind of revealing the way that the system downgrades what you're doing and makes it difficult as a non-linear thinker for you to flourish. So it's a little bit like, I mean, I don't like the word, but it's like a bit like the 48 laws of power. Once you understand what you're up against and you can see how it works, then you become you gain power within that. Because one of the great ways, I mean, like, you've only got to look at the financial systems, the legal systems. One of the ways that they discombobulate, especially creatives, is that they tie you up in all these kind of restrictive but very linear pathways that the creative mind just feels utterly out of sync with. So the first thing that I do is get people to understand how these systems actually really work. So, for example, most creatives have no idea how these different forms of wealth work. So, how the rules of the wealthy work as opposed to the rules of you and me floating around in the economy trying to make money. So it's understanding that these laws and these loopholes, we can also use them. We just don't know about them. And, it's the other thing that I would say is to also work on your own healing and physicality. The stronger, more vital, and the more alive we are, the healthier we are, the more energy we have, the more we're able to function. And, we have to dispel this idea of the damaged, sick creative, locked away, the alcoholic, the addict. Absolutely. Of course, those are all realities. But for me, part of the whole thing about being a creative is to be super healthy, super fit, super agile of mind and body, and to have a high frequency of being. So that's available to me. So having a high frequency of energy, being super healthy as you possibly can. And so it means you can show up for the world And that also gives you a resilience, which once you have resilience, then you can start to operate differently within these restrictive systems and even invent your own systems like decentralized currencies, decentralized medicine. All of these things now are starting to open up, and of course the old system doesn't like these things. But I feel that, like I said, we're crossing over into an era where we will become unstoppable, but we won't become unstoppable if we're sick and depressed. So we need to keep our energy high.
Beautifully visually said. One backup question to this. So when you enter the restricted elements of the square mind and all the dictatorship and all the alpha from both sides of or all sides of the humanity, anyway. So the question is, when you enter that space, what do you think is the best starting point of dealing with all the restrictive boxes once you're inside the loop?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, it's like understanding the kind of whose dojo you're fighting in as the first, or you're training in. So the thing that I would say that is undeniably important, whatever's going on, whatever system that you're involved in, is to establish dynamic, fruitful connections. Because if we're working alone and isolated, like so many creatives are, we become vulnerable to all of the vicissitudes that those systems have upon us. So it's to form relationships and connections with people who have skills that we can tap into and we can share. So, for example, like even, dare I say it, some people get annoyed about this, but in a way, although AI has encroached onto the creative realms and, unwelcomely, the other thing that it can help us to do is, for example, it can fill out a tax form in seconds, and that would take me a month of Sundays. I have no clue about those sort of things, but we can start to use these things to take on those linear tasks, for example, that would have previously been way beyond us and slowed us down and got in the way of us actually. So it can open up more time, more space for us to be creative, whilst those linear kind of old world tasks are taken care of. But fundamentally, it's about the quality of your creative success is the quality of the connections that you make. So bear that in mind as you move forward. So almost the natural disposition of many artists is to be quite insular. And we have to rise above that tendency and realize that as we start to connect in the world and we start to share and we start to enroll people in a powerful possibility and a compelling vision, then it becomes an entity in and of itself. So we're in the business of unfolding movements, not just these singularities that are just us struggling alone, trying to make ourselves work. So we come together, we create groups of empowered creative entrepreneurs. We work together. We help each other do the things that we're not good at. We bring people in and resources in that can help us to do that. We can only move forward as a movement, not as these single little trapped entities within the system. So that's what the system doesn't want the creatives to do. They want us to remain isolated and alone.
Beautiful. So, beautiful advice for the artists out there. Anything else that you'd like to share about the new Starman Tarot Remastered, which is coming out in September and looks amazing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are several new cards in there, and I was really, really guided to bring these new images to life. And I think, like a lot of our conversations that we've been talking about, is that the original deck was, I mean, it probably took about 20 years to come, all the different variations. It's like 20 years of all these different things coming together. And then there it was, really kind of triggered by Bowie's death in 2016. And then in 2018, the deck, the original Starman was released. But here we are in 2025, halfway through 2025, and we're living in a very different world. So we're living in a kind of, the post-COVID world where we have been, corralled into these digitized fiefdoms, that we are all paying rent to, whether we like it or not. So we are in a very different world, even from 2018, or those systems and the way things were going, the trajectory was there, but we're right on we're in them now. We're immersed in them. So I felt that the energy that this remastered deck has to bring through is, again, this connection. It has to amplify this connection to something that is beyond words. It has, it's a bit like the intelligence that shapes everything, the evolution, the evolving intelligence, has a way of moving us to our highest possibility. And if we can, in a sense, get out of our own way, and these images, especially the new ones in there, have in many ways kind of solidified that capacity, within the creative sphere of the deck to help us to see more clearly. So it's very much the post-COVID world. It's a deck that will lead us forward from where we're at now. And that's really that's the whole point in remastering it. I mean, originally I had no plans to remaster this at all, but then it came through so strongly that we need to revisit this, and we need to make it as powerful as possible for where we're at now, and to help people to, like I said, to really bring that visionary spirit to life within each creative person. That's my mission on this, in this world, basically.
What I love also is the fact that you used a musical term for the revision of the cards. Remastered, of course, is used for remastering albums and singles. I have an album called Remastered, which is a collection album, and you used a musical term for a work of books, literature, and cards. So that was a wonderful combination of genres. How did you choose a musical term?
Well, if you look at some of the emerging science now, like the emerge of like using how, basically we are a torus field of energy, and if you look like the atom, an atom is a torus, it's an energetic field, and everything that we look at, everything that we understand now, I believe points back to there's different points of reference that we can look at. So on the one hand, we can say that it's kind of a trinity. So you can say there's light, water, and magnetism. And then the things that bring those together, you could say is possibly sound. So it's like sound resonating with these three things, the trinity, forms them into shapes, forms them into what we see, the light. I'm seeing an image of you on a screen. I'm in Bristol, United Kingdom, and you're in the United States. So this image is formed, and we can relate to that. And I feel that that's what's going on energetically with everything. And sound is something that is so fundamental. It's like the human body is really a giant instrument. to be played. It makes sound. There is sound coming out. This voice is sound. And it seems to pass us by unnoticed almost, but everything is sound frequencies and light and magnetism and water. So it's a bit like these miraculous things are forming everything. And I think that it's like we are being played by the universe, like we play music. And I play a lot of live music. I play didgeridoo, I play drums, my wife's an incredible experimenter in like improvised music. We have all these beautiful crystal bowls and different things. So we're always using sound to help us to not only stay healthy and vital, but to work through any kind of blockages or whether it's a blockage in an idea or it's a physical thing. So we use sound to open us up to something and then allow energy to flow. So this analogy with sound, I think, is fundamental. It also relates to how we use language as well. The thing that, like Ursula Le Guin said, the world is made of stories, not atoms. So our ability to transmit narratives is through sound, really.
Gorgeous ending. I hope we collaborate both on sounds, because we both do music, and I hope we collaborate through our tarot and soul work. It's been a tremendous privilege and honor to speak to you. This is our second interview. We had our first interview in the original deck. This is the second deck. Maybe there'll be another deck. We'll do a third interview. But in the meantime, I just want to thank you, and I wish everybody all over the world to check out Starman Tarot Remastered by David De Angelis. And if you'd like to get a tarot reading virtually with David or order art for your office or home, please visit his website. Would you like to tell our audience your website?
Yeah, it's Davide, Davide, and then De Angelis, which is DE, and then Angel, IS, DavideDeAngelis.com. So you can go on there, you can read all about the Starman, the new remastered Starman, and you can access, like I said, you can buy art, you can work with me live with the tarot and different forms of, kind of unfolding what we've been speaking about, really.
Thank you so much for being on the Archetypal Mosaic. I wish you tremendous blessings.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again.